Wallet's gone, the man rasped, panic hitching his voice. Brenda across the diner was already zeroing in. Another mess for her. Here it comes. But Clara Ara, she saw something else entirely in his hunted eyes. Not a scammer, not a problem. Just a man teetering on the edge. She knew that edge. Her decision was instant. Don't worry, she murmured, then walked toward her tips, not Brenda. But here's the thing. The secret Brenda doesn't know, can't know, that $5 bowl of stew wasn't just lunch. It was an investment. A down payment on a reckoning that would leave Kensington Erie's bleeding. They think they're firing a waitress. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Wallet's gone, the man rasped, panic hitching his voice. Brenda across the diner was already zeroing in. Another mess for her. Here it comes. But Clara Ara, she saw something else entirely in his hunted eyes. Not a scammer, not a problem. Just a man teetering on the edge. She knew that edge. Her decision was instant. Don't worry, she murmured, then walked toward her tips, not Brenda. But here's the thing. The secret Brenda doesn't know, can't know. That $5 bowl of stew wasn't just lunch, it was an investment. A down payment on a reckoning that would leave Kensington Erie's bleeding. They think they're firing a waitress. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. The alarm clock didn't chime. It howled, a 5 a.m. digital shriek that ripped through the fragile quiet of Clara Ara Miller's cramped apartment. For a long, heavy moment, she lay still, her cheek pressed against the worn pillow, the familiar ache blooming in her lower back. Yesterday's 12-hour shift at the Golden Spoon Diner clung to her like a shroud. The air hung thick with the ghosts of stale coffee and the faint, sweet scent of lavender laundry detergent, a constant reminder of the life she was fighting to maintain. With a sigh that tasted like defeat, Clara Ara dragged herself out of bed. The cold linoleum bit into her bare feet. In the next room, Leo coughed, a dry, rattling sound that always twisted her insides into knots. His asthma was a constant, unwelcome guest, its visits dictated by the whims of Chicago's polluted air and the cruel lottery of genetics. The brand-new nebulizer, a stark white monument to their latest emergency room ordeal, sat sentinel on his bedside table, a tangible reminder of the mountain of debt she was slowly, desperately trying to climb. At 29, Clara Ara felt like she carried the weight of a century. The woman staring back from the bathroom mirror was a stranger, her bright, hopeful eyes now framed by the faint etchings of worry. Her blonde hair, once her pride, was perpetually pulled back into a severe functional ponytail. No time for vanity, not when survival was a full-time job. Clara Ara was a waitress at the Golden Spoon Diner, a relentlessly average establishment owned by the sprawling corporate behemoth that was Kensington Erie's. Inker's glamorous? Far from it, but it was a paycheck, a fragile lifeline that kept the rent paid, barely, and Leo's inhalers filled most of the time. The drab polyester uniform, a pale yellow dress that perpetually smelled of fryer oil no matter how many times she washed it, hung on a hook behind the door. As she buttoned it up, she ran through the grim litany of her day. Drop Leo at Mrs. Gable's. Please. Let him not cough too much, not today. Pray there's no traffic on the Kennedy. Remember Wednesday's soup special? Clam chowder, Brenda's favorite. And above all, stay on the right side of Brenda Vance. Brenda, the diner's manager, was a force of nature, a human hybrid of steel, corporate policy, and burnt coffee. She ruled the Golden Spoon with a clipboard in one hand and a stopwatch in the other. To Brenda, customers weren't people. They were tickets. Employees weren't a team. They were units of labor. Every interaction was a metric, every action a data point. Table turn time, average guest check, upsell percentage. Compassion was an inefficient variable Brenda had long ago eliminated from her management equation. Miller, you're 3 minutes late. Brenda would snap if Clara Ara clocked in at 6:03 a.m., her voice sharp enough to cut glass. That's 180 seconds of unproductive labor cost the company has to absorb. Clara Ara swallowed a dry piece of toast, kissed a sleeping Leo on the forehead, and whispered, "Be good for Mrs. Gable, sweetie. Mommy loves you." She scribbled a quick note, left it on the counter with a small glass of juice, and slipped out into the pre-dawn chill of the Chicago streets. The Golden Spoon was already buzzing with a low-level anxiety when she arrived. The cooks were slapping bacon on the griddle, the dishwashers were clattering stacks of plates, and the other morning shift waitresses were rushing around, their faces tight with a practiced, joyless urgency. "Morning, Clara," sighed Maria, another waitress, her eyes darting nervously towards the back office. "Brenda's on a warpath today. Mark Renshaw's coming." Clara's stomach clenched. Mark Renshaw was the regional manager, a notorious corporate shark known for his surprise inspections and his ruthless habit of firing staff to streamline operations. His visits meant Brenda would be 10 times more demanding, scrutinizing every coffee pour, every crumb on the floor. "Great," Clara muttered, grabbing her apron. "Just what we need." The morning rush was a frenetic blur of shouted orders, clattering plates, and sloshing coffee. Clara moved with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned waitress, a smile plastered on her face. She was polite to the grumpy old man in booth 4 who always complained his coffee was too hot. She was patient with the table of indecisive tourists. She even managed a genuine laugh for Mr. Henderson, a regular who told the same stale joke every single day. Through it all, she felt Brenda's hawk-like gaze following her every move. She saw Brenda tap her watch when Clara spent an extra minute helping Mr. Henderson find his dropped glasses. She saw the slight frown when a child at one of her tables spilled a glass of water, forcing Clara to stop and clean it up. The unsaid message hung heavy in the air. Efficiency, Miller, efficiency. By midday, the initial rush had subsided into a manageable ebb. Clara finally had a moment to breathe, leaning against the service counter and rubbing her aching feet. Her tips so far were meager, barely enough to cover Mrs. Gable and a few essential groceries. A quick mental calculation confirmed her worst fear. After those expenses, there would be almost nothing left for Leo's new prescription. The anxiety, never far from the surface, began to bubble up again, a cold, unwelcome tide. She had to make more. She had to get more tables, turn them faster, upsell more desserts. She had to be the perfect employee, the embodiment of Golden Spoon efficiency. Then at precisely 1:15 p.m., the bell above the diner door jingled, announcing the arrival of someone the entire script of Kensington Erie's trained to avoid. He was the kind of person most people tried not to see. His clothes were ragged and ill-fitting, his graying hair matted and tangled. His face was a roadmap of hard times, etched with the deep, weary lines that spoke of a life lived on the fringes. He hesitated at the entrance, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of hunger and shame, like a stray dog unsure of its welcome. Brenda, standing near the cash register, saw him immediately. Her lips thinned into a disapproving line. She was already moving towards him, her body language radiating barely concealed hostility, preparing to eject him before he could even take another step inside. But Clara, whose station included the empty tables by the door, saw him first. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and in his, she didn't see a nuisance or a problem. She saw something far more unsettling, something achingly familiar. She saw a profound and desperate exhaustion, acting on an instinct she couldn't explain, an empathy honed by her own daily struggles. She picked up a menu, stepped in front of a glaring Brenda, and gave the man a small, gentle smile. "Table 7, she asked, her voice soft, offering him the same common courtesy she gave everyone else, and that Brenda was now primed to deny. The man looked surprised, then nodded slowly. Brenda stopped dead in her tracks, her face a mask of barely suppressed fury. The battle lines had just been drawn at table 7, and Clara had no idea she was fighting for a man who held the entire world in his hands. He slid into the cracked vinyl booth, moving with a stiff awkwardness, as if every muscle ached. He hunched over the menu Clara handed him, though he didn't seem to be reading it. His gaze was distant, lost in some private landscape of hardship. His hands trembled slightly as he folded and unfolded the corner of the laminated page, a nervous tick that betrayed his inner turmoil. From across the room, Clara could feel Brenda's stare burning into her back. Seating him was a deliberate act of defiance, a subtle rebellion against the cold, dehumanizing policies of Kensington Erie's, and they both knew it. Clara approached the table, notepad in hand. "Can I get you something to drink to start?" Coffee's fresh. The man looked up, startled. His eyes, she noticed, were a surprisingly clear, intelligent blue, though clouded with weariness. Just, just water, please. Thank you. His voice was raspy, unused, as if he hadn't spoken much lately. When she returned with the water, he still hadn't opened the menu. He was staring out the window, watching the city rush by, a solitary island of quiet desperation in the bustling diner. Have you decided what you'd like? Clara Ara asked gently, trying to keep her tone professional, despite the prickling sensation of Brenda's gaze on her back. He flinched slightly as if startled from a deep thought. Oh, He looked down at the menu, then back at her, a deep flush of shame coloring his weathered cheeks. What's the cheapest thing you've got that's filling? He mumbled, his eyes fixed on the table. Clara Ara's heart broke a little. She'd heard that question before, in different forms, whispered across tables by single mothers trying to feed 2 kids on $10, by students huddled over laptops trying to make 1 coffee last for 4 hours of free Wi-Fi. The sunrise special is our best value, she said, pointing to the all-day breakfast section. 2 eggs, bacon, toast, and hash browns. It's $10 or, she leaned in a little, lowering her voice. The kitchen staff made a big batch of beef stew for their own lunch. It's not on the menu, but it's hearty. I can get you a big bowl of that for $5. Comes with bread. His head shot up, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. The stew, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Yes, please, thank you. As Clara Ara walked to the kitchen to place the order, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She thought, this was why she'd gotten into the service industry in the first place years ago, before life had worn her down and corporate greed had started sucking the soul out of everything. It was about the simple human act of feeding someone, of offering a moment of comfort and care in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. The man, who had mumbled his name as Art, ate the stew with a slow, deliberate hunger that suggested he was savoring every single bite. He didn't wolf it down like a starving animal. He ate with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his disheveled appearance. He cleaned the bowl with the piece of bread, his movements methodical, almost reverent. Clara Ara kept his water glass full, checking on him as she would any other customer, despite Brenda's increasingly obvious glares and pointed gestures towards the other, more profitable tables in her section. She was racking up more demerits with every passing minute. Art was a silent customer. He didn't complain, didn't ask for anything, but he watched. Clara Ara didn't know it, but he was watching everything. He watched her patiently explain the menu to an elderly couple who couldn't read the small print. He saw her slip a handful of crayons and a coloring page to a restless toddler, earning a grateful smile from the frazzled mother. He saw her expertly juggle 6 plates on her arm, her movements efficient and graceful, despite her obvious fatigue. He saw her coworker Maria drop a tray of glasses, and he watched as Clara Ara was the first one there, not with a complaint, but with a quiet, "Don't worry, I've got it," as she helped pick up the shards of broken glass. Most of all, he noticed the interactions with Brenda. He saw the manager reprimand Clara Ara in hushed, angry tones for spending too long at his table. "Your job is to maximize turnover, Miller, not run a charity. That booth has been occupied for 45 minutes for a $5 sale." "Unacceptable." Clara Ara simply nodded, her face impassive, and said, "Yes, Brenda." When Art had finished, he sat for a long time, just nursing his glass of water. Finally, he signaled for the check. Clara Ara brought it over with a small, encouraging smile. "No rush at all," she said. He nodded and reached into the pockets of his worn jacket. He patted his front pockets, then his back pockets. A look of confusion crossed his face, which quickly morphed into stark, raw panic. He started searching more frantically, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged. "Is everything all right?" Clara Ara asked, her smile fading into genuine concern. "My wallet," he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "It's gone. It must have been stolen on the bus. I don't have any money. I can't pay." He looked utterly mortified, his face pale under his weathered skin. He started to rise, as if to flee. "I'm so sorry. This was the moment of truth, the inevitable collision between compassion and corporate policy. Company guidelines were crystal clear, drilled into them by Brenda and reinforced in every training manual issued by Kensington Erie's headquarters. If a customer cannot pay, do not engage. Do not make a scene. You signal the manager immediately. Brenda would then call security or the police, depending on the situation. It was a zero-tolerance policy designed to prevent theft and protect the company's assets. Clara Ara looked at the terrified man in front of her. Then she glanced across the diner at Brenda, who was already watching them. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to raise her hand, call Brenda over, and let the cold, impersonal gears of corporate policy grind this poor man into dust over a $5 bowl of stew. She thought of Leo. She thought of the overdue medical bill. She thought of her precarious financial situation and how desperately she needed this job. Losing it would be catastrophic. Then she looked back at Art, at the sheer, soul-crushing humiliation in his eyes. And in that moment, her own struggles didn't make her harder. They made her softer. She understood desperation. She understood what it felt like to be one unlucky break away from complete and utter disaster. Making a split-second decision that would irrevocably alter the course of her life, she gave him a reassuring look and placed a hand gently on his arm. "Don't worry about it," she whispered, her voice barely audible, betraying the fear simmering in her heart. "Stay here. Please don't move." Before the man could protest, she walked away from the table, not towards Brenda, but towards the small hidden pocket in her apron, where she kept her day's tips. Clara Ara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of her conscience. Every instinct screamed at her to follow the rules, to protect herself and her son, but the image of the man's panicked face was seared into her mind. She fumbled in her apron pocket, her fingers closing around the small, crumpled wad of bills she had earned so far. A 10, a 5, a 1, and a handful of change. $13 and some cents. It was her gas money, her grocery money, her, just in case, Leo's inhaler runs out, money. It was everything. With trembling hands, she smoothed out a $5 bill and 2 ones. The check was for $5 plus tax, totaling $5.45. She would use her own money, ring it up as a cash payment, and Brenda would be none the wiser. The man could leave without the humiliation of a police escort, and she could keep the job she so desperately needed. It felt like a simple, elegant, and compassionate solution. She walked to the point-of-sale terminal at the waitstaff station, her back carefully turned to Brenda, her every movement calibrated to avoid detection. She quickly typed in the table number and selected the cash payment option. Her hands were sweating as she opened the cash drawer to deposit the money. "What are you doing, Miller?" The voice was ice cold, delivered from right behind her, close enough to raise the hairs on the back of her neck. Clara Ara froze, her hand still inside the cash drawer. She slowly turned to face Brenda Vance. The manager's face was a thunderous mask, her eyes narrowed to menacing slits. I was just cashing out table 7, Clara Ara stammered, trying to sound casual, praying that Brenda hadn't seen. "With what money?" Brenda's voice was dangerously low, barely a whisper, but laced with a venomous intensity that made Clara Ara's blood run cold. "I've been watching you. That man told you he couldn't pay. I saw it on his face. And you did not signal for a manager, as per protocol." Clara Ara's mind raced, desperately searching for a plausible explanation. "He found the money. It was in a different pocket." It was a weak lie, and it crumbled instantly under Brenda's unwavering, predatory gaze. "Open your hand," Brenda commanded, her voice hard and implacable. Clara Ara hesitated, fear knotting her stomach. "Brenda, it's really—" "Miller, open your hand, or I'll have security do it for you." Defeated, Clara Ara opened her hand, revealing her crumpled bills, a meager offering in the face of Brenda's corporate wrath. Brenda's eyes flickered from the money in Clara Ara's palm to the cash drawer and back again. A slow, cruel smile of triumph spread across her face, revealing the yellowed edges of her teeth. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The smoking gun, the clear and undeniable breach of company policy that would finally justify her long-held animosity toward Clara. "So this is how it is," Brenda said, her voice now rising in volume, attracting the attention of nearby staff and customers. You are using your own funds to pay for a customer's meal, an unauthorized transaction, a flagrant violation of Kensington Erie's policy. 7B, subsection 4, employee funds shall not be commingled with company revenue or used to settle a customer's bill under any circumstances. She recited the rule like a zealous priest quoting scripture, her eyes gleaming with self-righteousness. The diner was growing eerily quiet. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversation began to fade as people turned to watch the unfolding drama, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. At table 7, Art looked on, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. He started to get up, to say something, to somehow intervene, but a subtle shake of Clara Ara's head begged him to stay put. Intervening now would only make things worse, for both of them. He was hungry, Brenda, Clara Ara pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper, laced with the raw fear of a cornered animal. He didn't have any money. It was $5. What was I supposed to do? Call the cops on him for a bowl of stew? You were supposed to follow procedure, Brenda snapped, her voice now a full-blown declaration for the entire room to hear. Procedures exist for a reason, to protect this business. What happens next time, Miller? Do you give away a steak dinner? Do you start emptying the register for every sob story that walks in that door? You are not just an employee, Miller. You are a liability. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on Clara Ara, stealing the air from her lungs, making it hard to breathe. Her cheeks burned with shame. She could feel the pitying stares from her co-workers and the curious, judgmental gazes from the customers, each look a tiny dagger twisting in her heart. I paid for it, Clara Ara said, her voice trembling but defiant, clinging to a sliver of hope. The company didn't lose a single cent. In fact, you made a profit on the stew. It was the wrong thing to say, a fatal error in judgment. Brenda's face contorted with undisguised rage. This isn't about one bowl of stew, Miller. It's about authority. It's about discipline. It's about the precedent you are setting. You have undermined my authority and willfully disregarded corporate policy. You have proven that you cannot be trusted. Brenda took a step back, her posture rigid and official. She was no longer a diner manager. She was an executioner, delivering a verdict from on high. Clara Ara Miller, she announced, her voice ringing with a cold finality that chilled Clara Ara to the bone. As of this moment, your employment with Kensington Erie's is terminated. You are fired. The word hung in the air, sharp and brutal, severing the fragile threads of Clara Ara's livelihood with a single, merciless stroke. A collective gasp rippled through the diner. Maria had her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Even the cooks had stopped working and were staring out from the kitchen pass-through, their faces etched with disbelief. Brenda, you can't, Clara Ara choked out, tears welling in her eyes. Please, my son, I need this job. You should have thought of your son before you decided to become a martyr for a vagrant, Brenda retorted coldly, her voice devoid of any empathy. Take off your apron. I'll have your final paycheck mailed to you. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your locker. I will escort you out myself. Numbly, Clara Ara untied the strings of her apron. The cheap yellow fabric suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a tangible representation of the weight of her responsibilities. She folded it and placed it on the counter. The tears that she had been desperately holding back now streamed freely down her face, carving wet tracks through her makeup. She looked past Brenda, her gaze landing on table 7. Art was standing now, his face pale, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like he wanted to speak, to scream, to tear the whole place down. But what could he do? He was a nobody, a homeless man who had inadvertently cost a kind woman her livelihood. Their eyes met one last time, and in his, she saw a look of profound, agonizing regret. As Brenda marched her toward the staff lockers, the oppressive silence of the diner was broken by the sound of a chair scraping back and a heavy, deliberate clatter. Someone had left a $20 bill on table 7, right next to the half-empty glass of water. But it was too late. The gears had been set in motion, and Clara Ara Miller, mother, waitress, and Good Samaritan, was now unemployed. The walk home was a blur. Clara Ara didn't remember the familiar route. the crack in the sidewalk on the corner of Elm and Third, the familiar rumble of the elevated train overhead. All she could feel was the phantom weight of the apron on her waist and the searing heat of humiliation on her cheeks. The city sounds were muffled, as if she were underwater, drowning in a sea of despair. When she reached her apartment building, the 3 flights of stairs felt like a mountain. Each step was a leaden weight, her legs trembling with a combination of exhaustion and shock. The key fumbled in the lock, her hands shaking too much to guide it home. Finally, the door clicked open, and she stepped into the suffocating silence of her empty apartment. For a moment, she just stood there in the small entryway, her purse sliding from her shoulder and landing on the floor with a soft thud. The reality of her situation crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. Fired! The word echoed in the silent apartment, mocking her. Fired for a $5 bowl of stew. Fired for being kind. She sank onto her worn-out sofa, the springs groaning in protest beneath her. She didn't cry. The tears had run dry on the walk home, leaving behind a hollow, aching numbness. Her mind, however, was a chaotic storm, a swirling vortex of fear and uncertainty. How was she going to pay rent next month? The landlord, Mr. Petro, was a stickler for rules and payments and had no patience. How would she afford Leo's medication? His new prescription was waiting at the pharmacy, its cost looming like a monster in the dark. What about food? The fridge was already looking bare, its shelves echoing the emptiness in her heart. Panic began to claw its way up her throat, a cold, sharp, suffocating sensation. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces of her crumbling world together, but they slipped through her fingers like grains of sand. She was a good worker. She was never late. She covered shifts for others. She did everything that was asked of her and more. How could it all be undone by one small act of compassion? Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the end table. It was of her and her late husband, David, taken 5 years ago on a rare trip to the lake. They were smiling, their faces bright with a future that had seemed so full of promise. David had been a chef, a man who believed that food was love. He would have been, she was a good worker. She was never late. She covered shifts for others. She did everything that was asked of her, and more. How could it all be undone by one small act of compassion? Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the end table. It was of her and her late husband, David, taken 5 years ago on a rare trip to the lake. They were smiling, their faces bright with a future that had seemed so full of promise. David had been a chef, a man who believed that food was love. He would have been proud of what she did today. "You always feed a hungry man, Clara," he used to say. No questions asked. That's the first rule of the kitchen. David had also worked for a Kensington Erie's establishment, a more upscale bistro downtown. He'd been passionate, creative, a rising star in the kitchen. Then one night, he'd been fired. The official reason was unauthorized use of company inventory. He had made a beautiful birthday cake for a dishwasher whose family couldn't afford one, using a handful of flour, sugar, and eggs from the pantry. He was fired on the spot by a manager just like Brenda, a man who saw only inventory shrinkage, not a gesture of human decency. The dismissal had broken David's spirit. He struggled to find another job with that mark on his record. The stress, the shame, it led him down a dark path. A year later, he was gone, leaving Clara alone with a 2-year-old Leo and a mountain of grief. The bitter irony was not lost on her. The same corporation, with its same soulless, rigid policies, had now shattered her life just as it had shattered his. It was a cruel repeating pattern, a legacy of corporate indifference that had claimed her family twice. A wave of anger, hot and fierce, finally broke through the numbness. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about David. It was about every little person ground up by the unfeeling machinery of a giant company that valued rules over people. Getting up from the couch, she walked to Leo's room. He was still at Mrs. Gable's. She would have to call and tell her she couldn't afford to pay her for the rest of the week. Her son was sleeping soundly in his small bed, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The nebulizer stood guard on his nightstand. She reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. He was her whole world, Everything she did for him. And now she had failed him. That was the thought that finally broke her. The tears came again, silent and agonizing. She sank to the floor, her head resting against the side of his bed, and wept. She wept for her lost job, for her shattered pride, for the uncertain future. She wept for David and the life they were supposed to have. She wept for the simple, crushing unfairness of it all. As the evening light faded outside the window, casting long shadows across the room, Clara Ara Miller felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. She had never felt so utterly and completely alone in the dark. While Clara Ara's world was shrinking to the four walls of her silent apartment, another world, one of panoramic city views and polished mahogany, was being shaken to its core. Arthur Kensington, known to Clara Ara only as Art, sat in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, the scent of rich leather, a stark, nauseating contrast to the diner's lingering smell of grease and despair. He had shed the ragged clothes now stuffed in a duffel bag on the floor and was back in a tailored buy-on suit. But the transformation was only skin deep. Inside, he was still the man from Table 7, horrified, ashamed, and powerless. He hadn't intervened. That was the thought that played on a torturous loop in his mind. He, Arthur Kensington, CEO and chairman of Kensington Eries Inc., a man whose single word could create or destroy careers, had sat by and watched a good woman be publicly humiliated and fired for showing him a kindness he hadn't experienced in years. He had stayed in character, played the part of the helpless vagrant because his undercover CEO consultants had told him that intervention would compromise the entire project. Observe and report, Mr. Kensington. Do not engage. What a fool he'd been. This whole exercise, cooked up by his PR team, was supposed to be a way to reconnect with the company his father had built. See the front lines, Art, his father had always said. A company's heart isn't in the boardroom. It's on the diner floor. After his father's death 6 months ago, Arthur, who had been raised on spreadsheets and profit margins, felt a knowing disconnect from that philosophy. He agreed to the undercover stunt, yet expecting to find inefficiency, maybe some minor theft, things he could fix with a memo and a new set of policies. Instead, he found Clara Ara, and he found Brenda. He had witnessed firsthand the brutal manifestation of the very corporate culture he had fostered. Brenda wasn't a monster, she was a product. She was the perfect manager by his company's standards. She quoted policy maximized profit and eliminated inefficiencies. And Clara Ara, with her boundless empathy, was the inefficiency she had eliminated. The car pulled up to the gleaming Kensington Tower, a monument of glass and steel that suddenly felt like a tomb. In his penthouse office on the 80th floor, the city lights spread out below him like a blanket of scattered jewels. He had always found this view inspiring, a symbol of his power and success. Tonight it just made him feel small and isolated. "Get me Mark Renaud on the line now," he barked at his assistant through the intercom. "And pull the complete employee file for a waitress named Clara Ara Miller from the Golden Spoon Diner on North Clark Street. And while you're at it, get me the file for the manager, Brenda Vance." He paced the length of his office, the plush carpet, muffling his angry footsteps. He had seen the fear in Clara Ara's eyes when she pleaded for her job, mentioning her son. He had created a system where a mother's livelihood could be extinguished over 545 holes. The thought was sickening. His assistant buzzed back. "Mr. Renshaw is online, sir, and the files have been sent to your secure tablet." Arthur snatched the phone. "Mark," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Arthur Kensington, I was reviewing the performance metrics for the North Clark Street Diner. Tell me about the manager, Brenda Vance." Renshaw, clearly caught off guard by a direct call from the CEO, stammered for a moment. "Mr. Kensington, sir, Brenda Vance is an exemplary manager, a real bulldog. She has the highest profit margins in my district. Table turn times are down 15%, and upsells are up 20% since she took over." "And her staff turnover rate?" Arthur asked, his eyes cold. There was a pause. "Well, sir, that is slightly higher than average, but in this industry, slightly higher." Arthur cut him off, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm looking at the numbers right here, Mark. It's the highest in the entire Midwest region. She churns through employees like they're disposable napkins. Do you reward that?" "Her results speak for themselves, sir," Renshaw said defensively. She's a bottom-line manager. That's what we've been incentivizing. We've been incentivizing. The words hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. Renshaw was right. The problem wasn't just Brenda or Mark. The problem was him. We're going to talk more about your incentive programs tomorrow, Mark. Be in my office at 8 a.m., Arthur said, and hung up before Renshaw could reply. He picked up his tablet and opened Clara Miller's file. It was sparse. Hired 3 years ago. No commendations, no demerits, just a steady, unremarkable record. He saw her address, her emergency contact information, and a note about her dependent son, Leo. Then he swiped to the next page to her personal information. He saw her last name, Miller, and next to it, the name of her late husband, listed as her former next of kin, David Miller. Arthur's blood ran cold. David Miller. The name echoed from the past. He quickly accessed the company's terminated employee archives, his fingers flying across the screen. He typed in the name. One result, David Miller, former line chef, terminated 5 years ago from the Kensington Grill. Arthur remembered the incident vaguely. A regional manager, a different one, had boasted about it in a quarterly meeting, making an example of a chef who had been caught giving away inventory. They had all nodded along, praising the manager's firm hand in protecting company assets. He looked back at Clara's file, then at David's. It was the same address. He stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a ghost of his company's past, a direct consequence of a culture he had helped build and perpetuate, coming back to haunt him. He had not just witnessed an injustice, he had participated in the second act of a tragedy his own company had written. The view from his window suddenly seemed to mock him. He had built an empire on a foundation of cold, hard numbers, and in the process he had crushed the lives of real people. People like David, people like Clara. A profound, soul-deep shame washed over him, followed by a white-hot resolve. This was not something a memo could fix. This required more than a policy change. This required a reckoning. He buzzed his assistant again, his voice now steady and imbued with a commanding clarity he hadn't felt in years. Cancel my 8 a.m. meeting with Mark Renshaw, he said. Clear my entire morning schedule and have my car ready at 7:30 a.m. I'm going back to the Golden Spoon Diner. The next morning, the Golden Spoon Diner was operating with a nervous, subdued energy. Clara's absence was a palpable void. The staff moved with a hesitant caution, every action performed under the shadow of the previous day's brutal firing. Brenda Vance patrolled the floor like a victorious general, her posture even more rigid than usual, her presence a clear warning to anyone else considering stepping out of line. She was sipping her coffee near the register when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, a formulaic welcome to the Golden Spoon dying on her lips. Standing in the doorway was not a regular customer. It was a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. He was flanked by 2 other people, a man and a woman, both impeccably dressed and holding portfolios. The man in the suit was tall, with an air of absolute, unshakable authority. His clear blue eyes swept across the diner, taking in every detail. They were the same intelligent blue eyes Brenda had seen in The Ragged Vagrant the day before. Her brain struggled to connect the 2 images. It was impossible. She blinked, but he was still there now, walking slowly toward her. Good morning, Aku, the man said, his voice calm but resonant with power. It was the same voice, no longer raspy, but smooth and commanding. I believe we met yesterday. You, however, met Art. My name is Arthur Kensington. Brenda's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor and splashing hot liquid across her sensible shoes. She didn't even notice. The name echoed in her ears. Kensington, as in Kensington Eries. The staff behind the counter froze. The low chatter of the few morning customers died away. Mr. Kensington, she stammered, her face draining of all color. I had no idea, sir. It's an honor. I didn't recognize you. That was the point, Arthur said coolly, his gaze unwavering. I came to see my company from the perspective of a customer, or in my case, from the perspective of a man with nothing, and what I saw was illuminating. He gestured to the 2 people with him. This is Elizabeth Shaw, my head of human resources, and this is Michael Chen from my legal department. We're here to conduct an immediate and thorough operational review. He then turned his attention to the rest of the stunned staff. I would like to assure you all that your jobs are safe. We are here to fix what is broken, not to punish those who have been forced to work within a broken system. His gaze landed back on Brenda, and all warmth vanished from his eyes. I saw a manager who prioritizes policies over people, who values a $5 transaction over human dignity, and who fires a dedicated, compassionate employee without a moment's hesitation to enforce a soulless rule. Brenda was trembling now, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Sir, I was just following procedure. The company handbook. I am well aware of what the handbook says. Arthur interrupted, his voice sharp as glass. I signed off on it, and I have never been more ashamed of my own signature. You did exactly what the system I created taught you to do, and that is the problem. He turned to his HR head. Elizabeth, I want you to begin one-on-one interviews with every employee here. I want to know everything unfiltered, unedited. I want to know about their struggles, their fears, their ideas. Then he pulled out his personal phone. He scrolled through a contact and pressed call. He put it on speaker for Brenda to hear. After 2 rings, a weary, grief-stricken voice answered. Hello, Clara Ara. Clara Ara Miller? Arthur asked, his own voice softening considerably. There was a pause. Yes. Who is this? My name is Arthur Kensington. You? You helped me yesterday at the diner. I was the man at table 7. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with confusion and disbelief. I don't understand. I know you don't, and I am so profoundly sorry for what happened to you. More sorry than I can possibly put into words. What you did was the kindest, most decent thing I have seen in a very long time, and you were punished for it. That ends today. He took a deep breath. Clara Ara, I need to ask you to come back to the diner right now. There's something we need to discuss in person. It's important. It's about your husband, David. At the mention of David's name, there was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Brenda's eyes went wide. She knew about David Miller's firing. It was a legendary story among Kensington managers, an example of how to maintain standards. The full horrifying scope of the situation was finally dawning on her. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Clara said, her voice no longer weary but filled with a new sharp and uncertain intensity. Arthur ended the call and looked at Brenda, whose face was now a pale, ghostly white. The woman you fired yesterday, Arthur said, his voice low and heavy with meaning, was the widow of a man our company already failed once. You didn't just fire a waitress. You repeated history, and I was there to witness the whole shameful cycle. Now we are all going to sit here and wait for her to arrive, and we are going to begin to make it right. Clara Ara walked into the Golden Spoon Diner like a person entering a dream. The 20-minute taxi ride paid for by the car service Arthur Kensington had sent had done little to prepare her for the scene inside. Her former co-workers were gathered in small, hushed groups. Her former manager, Brenda Vance, was sitting stiffly at a table, pale and silent. And in the center of it all stood the man from table 7. No longer Art the Vagrant, but Arthur Kensington, the CEO, his powerful presence commanding the entire room. He turned as she entered, and the look on his face was one of deep, undisguised remorse. He walked toward her, meeting her in the middle of the diner floor. Clara Ara, he began, his voice filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Thank you for coming. First, before anything else, I want to apologize. What happened to you yesterday was an unforgivable failure on my part and on the part of the company I lead. There is no excuse. Clara Ara was still trying to process the sheer surreality of it all. You're the CEO, she stated the words, feeling foreign in her mouth. I am, he confirmed, and I have been a very poor one. I lost sight of what my father built this company on, people. You reminded me of that. Your compassion, your integrity, even when it cost you everything. That is the core of what this business should be. He gestured to an empty booth. Please sit with me. Hesitantly, she slid into the booth and he sat opposite her. For the first time, she wasn't his waitress. They were equals. When I looked at your employee file, he continued gently, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. Your husband's name, David Miller. I remembered his case. Clara Ara stiffened old wounds, reopening with a fresh, sharp pain. You fired him for giving a birthday cake to a man who had nothing. Arthur didn't flinch from her accusatory gaze. He met it head on. Yes, he said, his voice thick with regret. We did. It was a decision made by a regional manager, but I was the CEO. I endorsed the culture that allowed it to happen. A culture that prized a few dollars worth of flour and sugar over a man's dignity and career. I see now with a clarity that sickens me that David's firing wasn't just a mistake. It was a moral failing. A failing that I believe contributed to what happened to him. And for that, I am truly deeply sorry. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of validation of a long-held pain finally being acknowledged. Clara Ara, I cannot undo the past, Arthur said, leaning forward, his voice earnest. I cannot bring David back, but I can promise you, starting today, that his legacy and your act of kindness will become the catalyst for a fundamental change in this entire corporation. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I didn't come here just to offer you your job back. Frankly, you deserve better than that. I am creating a new position, a new department within Kensington Eries. It's called the Kensington Cares Initiative. Its sole purpose will be to audit and reform our company policies, to implement employee support programs, and to ensure that compassion and empathy are woven into the very fabric of how we do business. We'll establish emergency funds for employees in crisis, overhaul our management training, and create pathways for real feedback from the ground up. He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a desperate hope. And I want you to run it. I want you to be its first ever director. I don't want someone with a business degree who's never served a plate of food in their life. I want someone who understands the human cost of a bad policy. I want someone with integrity, with courage, and with a heart. I want you, Clara. Clara Ara was speechless, the director of a corporate initiative. It was unfathomable. Me? I'm a waitress. I don't know how to run a department. You know how to be a decent human being? Arthur counted. That's the most important qualification. We will provide you with all the training resources and support you need. A team, an office at headquarters, and a salary that will ensure you and Leo never have to worry about a medical bill or the rent again. I'm not offering you a job, Clara Ara. I'm asking you to be my partner in fixing this company to help me build a corporation that David would have been proud to work for. Across the room, Brenda Vance watched this exchange, her face a complicated mask of shock, shame, and perhaps for the first time, a glimmer of understanding. Her world of rigid rules and cold metrics had been turned upside down by a single act of kindness she had tried to stamp out. Clara Ara looked at Arthur Kensington, the man she had fed when he was hungry. She thought of Leo, of David, of the endless, exhausting struggle. And for the first time in years, she saw a light at the end of the tunnel. Not just an escape from her circumstances, but a chance to build something better, to give meaning to her own suffering and to David's memory. A slow, tentative smile touched her lips. Okay, she said, her voice clear and steady. Yes, I'll do it. Arthur Kensington let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was the beginning of a long road, but it was a start. The Golden Spoon Diner, once the scene of a cruel injustice, had just become the birthplace of a revolution, all because one waitress chose kindness over policy, and one CEO was finally willing to see the human beings behind his bottom line. The story of Clara Ara Miller and Arthur Kensington isn't just about a job lost and a fortune gained. It's a powerful reminder that our true character is revealed not in how we follow the rules, but in how we treat each other, especially when no one is watching. Clara Ara's simple act of kindness, born from her own struggles, created a ripple that didn't just come back to her. It grew into a tidal wave of change that reformed an entire company. It proves that one person armed with empathy can be more powerful than the most rigid corporate policy. Her story teaches us that true strength lies in compassion and that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most profound rewards. What seems like a thankless sacrifice could be the very thing that changes everything. If Clara Ara's incredible journey moved you, please give this video a thumbs up to spread the message of kindness. Don't forget to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more real-life stories that will inspire and amaze you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.